You probably think the Dean's Medal for Clinical Excellence is just an award, but for me, this stage is a courtroom. My biological parents are sitting in the front row, expecting a heartwarming reunion. Instead, they just froze. They realize the surname announced over the speakers does not belong to them anymore. They believe they are here to be forgiven, but I am about to show the entire auditorium exactly who threw me away like a receipt 13 years ago. My name is Victoria Griffin. The lights inside the auditorium of the Stonebridge University School of Medicine are blinding, designed to cast a golden, triumphant glow over the graduates. But from where I stand, they feel more like the stark, unforgiving beams of an interrogation room. They burn against my retinas, turning the sea of faces in the cavernous hall into a blur of shadows and light. The air is thick, suffocatingly so, heavy with the scent of expensive lilies, floor wax, and the stale, nervous sweat of 200 medical students waiting for their names to be called. I can feel the weight of the white coat on my shoulders. It is a heavy garment, stiff with starch and significance, but it feels lighter than the secrets I have carried for 13 years. My thumb finds the silver band on my ring finger. It is a simple piece of jewelry, cheap sterling silver that has scratched and dulled over time. A stark contrast to the diamond-studded bands and heirlooms worn by the mothers in the front row. I twist it once, twice. The metal digs into the soft skin of my finger. A sharp, grounding sensation. This is a habit I picked up when I was a teenager. A nervous tic developed in waiting rooms and social worker offices. A way to channel the tremor in my hands into something controlled. Today, however, my hands are not shaking. They are steady. They are the hands of a surgeon, or at least, they will be soon. They are hands that have learned to hold a scalpel with precision, hands that have learned to stitch flesh back together, and today, they are hands that are ready to tear a facade apart. Dean Miller stands at the podium. He is a man who loves the sound of his own voice, a quintessential administrator who speaks in bold, inspiring platitudes that look good on university brochures. He adjusts his spectacles, the stage lights gleaming off the lenses. The microphone amplifies his breathing, a rhythmic sound that echoes through the silence of the hall. The Dean's Medal for Clinical Excellence is not merely about grades, Dean Miller booms, his voice resonating with practice gravitas. It is not simply about test scores or research papers. It is about character. It is about the ability to stand in the face of suffering and offer not just a cure, but hope. It is about resilience. This year, the faculty was unanimous in their decision. He pauses for effect. The silence in the room stretches, tight as a suture. I can feel the anticipation of my classmates behind me, the shifting of bodies in chairs, the collective holding of breath. But I'm not looking at them. I am not looking at the dean. My eyes are locked on the VIP section. Front row, center, the best seats in the house. I made sure of that. I personally arranged the tickets. Dean Miller looks down at the heavy cream-colored card in his hand. I see his eyebrows lift slightly, a moment of genuine respect breaking through his rehearsed administrative demeanor. He leans into the microphone. Victoria Griffin. The name rings out. It hangs in the air, crisp and undeniable. The applause starts as a polite ripple and quickly grows into a roar. My classmates are cheering. They know how hard I worked. They know the double shifts, the extra rotations, the nights I slept in the on-call room because I had nowhere else to go. But I do not hear them. The sound is muffled, distant, like noise heard from underwater. I step forward, moving out of the line of graduates. As I walk toward the stage, my gaze does not waver. I focus entirely on two people sitting in those prime seats I reserved. The woman is wearing a pastel blue suit that probably cost more than my first year of tuition. Her hair is perfectly coiffed, a stiff helmet of blonde that tries too hard to deny her age. That is Gwen, my biological mother. Her hands are raised halfway, poised to clap, but they have frozen in midair. Her mouth is slightly open, the polite, proud smile she had plastered on her face dying a slow, agonizing death. She has heard the name, Griffin, It is not the name she gave me. It is not the name she wrote on the admission forms at Redwood Children's Hospital all those years ago. It is a stranger's name. And seeing me, seeing the face of the daughter she discarded standing under the halo of academic glory, her brain is misfiring. She looks like a computer that has encountered a fatal error. The cognitive dissonance is paralyzing her. She came here expecting to see a Mallory. She came here expecting to reclaim a piece of property she misplaced. Instead, she is looking at a griffin. Beside her sits Derek, my biological father. He is looking down at the glossy program in his lap, his neck bent as if bearing a great load. His face has drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray that reminds me of patients in the late stages of organ failure. He is reading the biography printed there. Victoria Griffin, future pediatric oncologist. He looks as if he has just realized he is sitting in the defendant's chair. But the exits are blocked. He shifts his weight, the expensive fabric of his suit rustling, wanting to stand, wanting to run, but social pressure is a powerful cage. He cannot leave. Everyone is watching. The cameras are rolling. He is trapped in the spotlight of his own making. I do not blink. I do not smile. I do not offer them the grace of looking away. I learned a long time ago how to look at monsters without flinching. That is the funny thing about growing up and surviving. The giants of your childhood turn out to be just small. Selfish people when you view them from a height, and I am high above them now. I am on the stage, and they are in the pit. I reach the podium. Dean Miller hands me the heavy bronze medal. The ribbon feels cool against my neck as he places it over my head. He shakes my hand, his grip firm and warm. "Well earned, Victoria," he whispers, unaware of the war happening 10 feet away from him. "Thank you," I reply. My voice is level. It does not tremble. I turn to the microphone. I place my hands on either side of the podium, gripping the wood until my knuckles turn white. The silence that falls over the room is absolute. It is the kind of silence you hear right before a surgeon makes the first incision. The audience is expecting a speech about late-night study sessions, coffee addiction, and the noble pursuit of healing. They are expecting gratitude. They are expecting me to thank my parents for their sacrifice. In a way, I lean in. The metal mesh of the microphone is cold against my lips. I scan the crowd, letting my eyes sweep over the hundreds of proud families, the fathers holding bouquets, the mothers wiping tears. Then, my eyes snap back to Gwen and Derek. Gwen has lowered her hands to her lap, clutching her purse as if it is a shield. Derek is staring at me with a mixture of terror and pleading. I take a breath. I was once left behind right inside a hospital. The words hang there. They are not poetic. They are blunt instruments. I see the confusion ripple through the crowd. A few people shift uncomfortably. This is not the opening line of a valedictorian speech. This is a confession. I keep my eyes on Gwen. She flinches as if I have physically struck her. She knows this story. She just never thought she would hear it told into a microphone. Most people think of hospitals as places where you go to get better. I continue, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room without effort. But for some, a hospital is a lost and found bin, a place where broken things are left, in the hopes that someone else will pick up the bill. Suddenly, the auditorium fades. The golden lights turn harsh and fluorescent. The smell of lilies is replaced by the stinging, chemical odor of antiseptic and floor wax. The velvet seats vanish, replaced by hard plastic chairs and linoleum tiles. I am not 26 years old. I am 13. The memory hits me with the force of a physical blow. It is October. The air outside is crisp, but inside the Redwood Children's Hospital, the air is stagnant and recycled. I am sitting on a crinkling paper sheet that sticks to the back of my thighs. The examination table is high, making my legs dangle uselessly. The room is freezing. The air conditioning is set to a temperature that feels like the Arctic. Or maybe the cold is just coming from inside me. There is a monitor beeping somewhere to my left, a rhythmic, indifferent sound that measures life in beats per minute. Beep, beep, beep. It is the soundtrack of my terror. I am wearing a gown that is too big for me, the fabric thin and patterned with faded geometric shapes in blue and green. I am shivering, my teeth clattering together, but not just from the cold. I am terrified. I can see the doctor's mouth moving. Doctor Nolan Hayes. He is a kind man with tired eyes, but his words are sharp. Leukemia, treatment protocols, survival rates. The words float in the air like dust motes. I do not understand all of them, but I understand the tone. I understand that I am sick, really sick. I look toward the door, waiting. I am waiting for the frantic hug. I am waiting for the tears. I am waiting for my mother to rush forward and tell the doctor to do whatever it takes. I am waiting for my father to say that money is no object. But the hug never comes. Instead, I hear Derek's voice. It is dry, devoid of emotion, like he is negotiating a contract for a used car. How much is this going to cost? That was the first question. Not, is she going to be okay? Not, does it hurt? But how much? I remember looking at Gwen. She was checking her watch. She looked annoyed, as if my cancer was an inconvenience that was making her late for a hair appointment. My sister, Paige, was in the corner, texting on her phone, completely checked out. I was a ghost in my own family before I was even dead. The memory is so vivid I can almost taste the metallic tang of fear in my mouth. I remember the social worker coming in later. I remember the hushed conversations in the hallway. I remember the realization, cold and absolute, that they were not leaving to get overnight bags. They were leaving to get away from the dead I represented. I pull myself back to the present. The auditorium rushes back into focus. The silence is heavy now, weighted with shock. The audience is still silent, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the metaphor that explains why I started a celebratory speech with such a dark image. But there is no metaphor. There is only the truth. Gwen and Derek are staring up at me, their faces masks of panic. I can see the calculation in their eyes. They are trying to figure out how much I'm going to say. They are trying to figure out if they can make a scene, if they can storm out. But they know they cannot. To leave now would be an admission of guilt. To leave now would shatter the image they have so carefully constructed for their country club friends. They are not here because they are proud. They are not here because they missed me. They found out about the success. They found out that the daughter they abandoned is now a doctor. They found out that the burden is now an asset. They are here because they think time erases debts. They think 13 years is enough of a statute of limitations on abandonment. They are wrong. They did not come here today to congratulate a daughter. They came here to ask for the return of an investment they threw into the trash the moment it became a liability. They see the medal around my neck, and they see prestige. They see the MD after my name, and they see a retirement plan. I grip the podium tighter. I am Victoria Griffin. I am the girl who survived the cancer they thought would kill me. I am the girl who survived the foster system they threw me into. I am the girl who survived the loneliness they gifted me. And today, I am not just a graduate. I am the prosecutor. I look directly at them. Ignoring the hundreds of other people in the room, I speak to them, and only them, though my voice carries to every corner of the hall. They are sitting here today, I say, my voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate and dangerous. They are wearing their best clothes. They are smiling. They believe that blood is a contract that can be paused when it is inconvenient and resumed when it is profitable. I pause. But they are about to learn that some contracts are voided the moment you walk out the door. I take a deep breath, ready to tell the rest of the story, ready to peel back the layers of their hypocrisy one by one. The dean looks confused, but he does not stop me. No one stops me. The story has begun, and I am the only one with the pen. They aren't here to congratulate, I say, delivering the line I have rehearsed in the mirror for a decade. They are here to ask for back what they threw away. The diagnosis did not land like a hammer. It landed like a receipt. I was sitting in Dr. Nolan Hayes's office on the third floor of the Redwood Children's Hospital. The room was painted a cheerful, deceptive shade of yellow, the kind used to distract toddlers from the fact that they are about to be poked with needles. But I was not a toddler. I was 13 years old enough to understand the tone of voice adults use when they are delivering bad news, and old enough to know that when a doctor closes the file on his desk and takes off his glasses, the world is about to shift on its axis. Doctor. Hayes was a good man. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped slightly, burdened by the weight of the words he had just spoken. He had just told us that my bone marrow was producing broken, useless soldiers. He had used the word leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He had spoken quickly about protocols, about induction phases, about a 90% cure rate if we acted immediately and aggressively. He was trying to sell us on the hope. He was trying to sell us on the life that was still waiting for me. I sat there, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, waiting for the sound of my mother crying. I waited for the heavy hand of my father to land on my shoulder. I waited for the world to stop because their youngest daughter might die. Instead, the silence in the room was broken by the sharp, impatient tapping of a finger on a glass screen. I looked over. Paige, my 16-year-old sister, was slouched in the corner chair. She was not looking at me. She was not looking at the doctor. She was texting. Her thumb moved with a rhythmic, practiced speed. She looked bored, the way she looked when she was waiting for me to finish trying on clothes at the mall so we could leave. She had SAT prep in 2 hours, and I could practically hear her calculating the traffic time in her head. Her indifference was a cold draft in the small room. But it was nothing compared to what happened next. Derek Mallory, the man whose DNA I shared, did not look at me. He did not look at the frightening diagrams Dr. Hayes had laid out on the desk. He looked at the paperwork. His eyes were narrowing, performing a rapid, silent calculation that had nothing to do with white blood cell counts and everything to do with numbers in a bank account. "What is the timeline on this?" Derek asked. His voice was flat. "Doctor?" Hayes blinked, clearly caught off guard. He leaned forward. "Well, as I said, we need to start chemotherapy immediately. The induction phase lasts about 4 weeks, followed by consolidation therapy. The entire treatment plan usually spans 2 to 3 years for maintenance, but the first 6 months are the most critical and intensive." Derek nodded, but he was not listening to the medical jargon. "And the cost? What are we looking at here? Total? I need the bottom line." "Doctor," Hayes paused. The air in the room seemed to suck out the door. "Mr. Mallory, the cost varies depending on how Victoria responds to the treatment. But right now, the priority is getting her admitted. We have a bed ready in the oncology ward." "I am asking about the out-of-pocket," Derek pressed, his voice hardening. "We have the silver tier insurance plan. The deductible is high. The copay for specialists is 40% out of network. Is this hospital in network? And the drugs. I have read about these drugs. They cost thousands of dollars a dose." "Mr. Mallory," the doctor said, his voice tightening with professional restraint. "We have financial counselors who can walk you through the billing. There are payment plans. There are grants." "Grants?" Gwen spoke up for the first time. My mother was sitting perfectly straight, her hands clasped around her designer purse as if she were afraid someone might snatch it. She turned her head slowly to look at the doctor. She did not look scared. She looked offended. "You mean charity," Gwen said. The word tasted like vinegar in her mouth. "You are talking about us applying for charity. There are foundations that assist families with catastrophic illnesses." "Doctor," Hayes explained gently, "it is nothing to be ashamed of. Leukemia treatment is expensive for anyone. These funds exist to ensure the patient gets the care they need without bankrupting the family." Gwen let out a short, sharp breath through her nose. "We live in the Highland Park district. Doctor, do you know what happens if a charity van pulls up to our driveway? Do you know what happens if people find out the Mallorys are taking handouts? We are not those people. We do not take charity." I looked at her. my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Mom?" I whispered. She did not turn to me. She kept her eyes on the doctor, her expression rigid. "We have an image to maintain. Derek is up for partner next year. Paige is applying to Ivy League schools. We cannot have our financial dirty laundry aired to a review board because we applied for some hardship fund." "Okay, doctor," Hayes said, and I could hear the steel entering his voice now. "If you do not want assistance, we can set up a direct billing plan, but I need to be clear. Victoria needs to be admitted today. This is not elective. This is life or death." Derek finally looked up from the papers. He looked at me, but he did not see his daughter. He saw a liability column. He saw a depreciating asset. He looked at me the way he looked at a car that had blown its transmission, evaluating whether it was worth the repair cost or if it was better to scrap it. "I have done the math," Derek said coldly. "The premiums are going up next year anyway, but with the deductible reset in January, plus the out-of-network costs for the specialists you are recommending, we are looking at 6 figures. Minimum. That is Paige's tuition. That is the retirement fund." "Derek," Gwen said, a warning tone in her voice, but not the one I hoped for. She was not warning him to stop being cruel. She was warning him not to say the quiet part out loud in front of a stranger. "No, Gwen. Look at the numbers," Derek snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the imaginary ledger in the air. "We cannot afford this, not without liquidating assets, not without changing our lifestyle completely." "Doctor," Hayes stood up. He was not a tall man, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over the desk. "Mr. Mallory? Mrs. Mallory? I am talking about your daughter's life. Money is not the conversation we should be having right now." Derek stood up too. He smoothed his tie. He looked the doctor dead in the eye and said the words that would kill the girl I used to be. "What if she wasn't our dependent?" The room went absolute zero. Even Paige stopped texting. She looked up, her thumb hovering over the screen, her mouth slightly open. "Doctor?" Hayes frowned, confusion knitting his brows. "I beg your pardon?" "The state," Derek said, his voice dropping to a conversational, almost helpful volume. "If she were a ward of the state, if she were in the foster system, the state pays for the medical care, correct? 100% coverage, no deductibles, no copays. Medicaid picks up the entire bill." I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I thought I might faint. I looked at my father. He was discussing trading me to the government as if he were discussing a tax loophole. He was proposing abandoning me to save his credit score. "You cannot be serious, doctor," Hayes whispered. The disgust in his voice was palpable. "It is a logical solution," Derek argued, sounding almost defensive now. "She gets the treatment. The hospital gets paid by the government. We avoid bankruptcy. Everyone wins." "Everyone wins?" "Doctor." Hayes slammed his hand down on the desk. The sound made me jump. "You are talking about abandoning your sick child. You are talking about surrendering your parental rights. Do you understand what that does to a 13-year-old girl? She needs her parents. She needs support, not a bureaucratic transfer." "We can't support her if we are destitute," Gwen hissed, finally standing up to join her husband's united front. "Do you think I want this? But we have to be practical. Paige has a future. We have worked too hard to lose everything because of bad luck." Bad luck. That was what I was to them. I was not a person. I was a biological error, a statistical anomaly that was going to cost them their summer home. "Mom!" I screamed. The word ripped out of my throat, raw and terrified. "Mom, please, I'm scared. Don't leave me." Gwen finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. They were the eyes of a woman looking at a stain on her favorite rug. "Victoria, stop it," she snapped. "Don't make a scene. You are embarrassing yourself." "I don't want to be a ward of the state." I was crying now, hot tears spilling down my face, blurring the yellow room into a smear of color. "I want to go home. I'll be good. I won't ask for anything. Please, Daddy, don't do this." Derek refused to make eye contact with me. He kept his gaze fixed on the doctor. If we refuse to pay, you have to treat her anyway, right? By law? But then you come after us for the debt. If we surrender custody, the debt isn't ours. Doctor. Hayes looked at them for a long moment. His face had gone hard, the professional mask slipping to reveal a deep, human fury. He did not sit back down. He walked over to the door and opened it. I am calling social services. Doctor, Hayes said. His voice was ice. Not to facilitate your financial strategy, Mr. Mallory, but because I am now obligated to report that this child has no safe home to return to. I am reporting medical neglect and abandonment. Call them, Derek said, calling the bluff that wasn't a bluff. Do the paperwork. We will sign whatever we need to sign. Derek, Gwen whispered, looking at the open door, terrified someone in the hallway might hear. The scandal. It is a closed record, Gwen, Derek assured her, his voice low. Nobody has to know. We tell the neighbors she went to a boarding school for children with special medical needs. We spin it. We control the narrative. But we are not paying $250,000 for this. I sat there, frozen. I watched my sister Paige slowly put her phone in her bag. She looked at me for 1 second. Just 1 second. And in her eyes, I saw relief. She was relieved that the money for her college, for her car, for her life, was safe. I was the sacrifice, and she was okay with that. The next hour was a blur of shouting I could only hear through the walls, of nurses coming in to check on me with pity in their eyes, of the air growing colder and colder, when the social worker, a woman named Marla with a kind but weary face, finally entered the room. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. It was no longer a medical consultation. It was a transaction. My parents, no, Gwen and Derek, were sitting at a small table in the corner. They were signing documents. I could hear the scratch of the pen against the paper. It was a sharp, final sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. They were signing away their rights. They were signing away my birthdays, my holidays, my fears, and my future. They were transferring ownership of Victoria Mallory to the state of North Carolina. Marla walked over to me. She crouched down so she was at eye level with me. She smelled like coffee and rain. Victoria, she said softly, my name is Marla. I am going to be making sure you are safe, okay? Your doctor is getting your room ready upstairs. Are they leaving? I asked. My voice was small, barely a whisper. Marla glanced over her shoulder at the couple by the table. Derek was checking the document one last time, ensuring there were no loopholes that could lead back to his wallet. Gwen was applying fresh lipstick, preparing to face the world outside. Yes, honey, Marla said, and I saw the heartbreak in her eyes that she was trying to hide. They are leaving. Derek stood up. He capped his expensive pen and put it back in his jacket pocket. He did not come over to hug me. He did not say goodbye. He just nodded to the lawyer the hospital had summoned, turned, and walked out the door. Gwen lingered for a fraction of a second. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might break. I thought the mother in her might wake up. But then she straightened her blazer, smoothed her skirt, and followed him. Paige trailed behind them, her eyes already back on her phone, typing out a text to a friend, probably about how annoying her afternoon had been. The door clicked shut. I was alone in the yellow room. The silence was deafening. I looked down at my hands. They were the same hands I had woken up with that morning. But they felt different now. They felt lighter, untethered. I realized then, with a clarity that cut deeper than any scalpel, what I had just become. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was an invoice that had been rejected. I was a bill that they had refused to pay. And as the nurse came in with a wheelchair to take me to the oncology ward, I knew one thing for certain. The family that had walked out that door had not just left me behind. They had sold me for the price of a luxury sedan and a pristine reputation, and I was the one who was going to have to pay the cost. The first night in the pediatric oncology ward was not defined by the pain. The chemotherapy had not truly begun to ravage my body yet, and the leukemia was a silent ghost in my blood, invisible and quiet. The real terror was the silence of the room itself. It was a vacuum. In the movies, hospital rooms are bustling places, but at 2 a.m, the ward was a tomb. My room, a sterile box with a window overlooking the dark parking lot, felt less like a place of healing and more like a storage unit for unwanted items. I lay there, staring at the acoustic tiles of the ceiling, counting the little dots until my vision blurred. The fear that gripped me was specific and suffocating. It was not the fear of dying. It was the fear of disappearing. If I stopped breathing right then, in that plastic-covered bed, who would notice? The monitors would beep. Sure, a nurse would rush in, but there would be no one in the waiting room wringing their hands. There would be no frantic phone calls to family members, because the family members had already signed a document stating they did not want to be called. I was a tree falling in a forest with absolutely no one around to hear the crash. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image of Derek's back as he walked out the door. I tried to block out Gwen's lipstick, perfect and red, a splash of color in a gray world that was leaving me behind. Then, the door creaked open. I flinched, pulling the thin hospital blanket up to my chin. I expected another check of my vitals. A quick, impersonal interaction with a nurse who was just trying to get through her shift. Light spilled in from the hallway, silhouetting a figure. She stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind her, cutting off the light, but leaving a softness in the room that hadn't been there before. "Can't sleep?" The voice was low, melodic, and lacked the pitying tone I had heard from everyone else all day. I shook my head against the pillow. The woman walked over to the side of the bed. She checked the IV drip with practiced efficiency. Her movements fluid and sure. Then she pulled up the rolling stool that the doctors used, sat down, and looked at me. "I am Elena," she said. She looked to be about 35 years old. She had dark hair tied back in a practical, messy bun that suggested she was too busy working to care about vanity. Her face was tired, the kind of tired that comes from years of 12-hour shifts. But her eyes were awake. They were brown, sharp, and incredibly clear. They looked like eyes that had seen everything a hospital could throw at a person: death, miracles, vomit, blood, and bureaucracy, and decided to keep looking anyway. "I am Victoria," I whispered, the habit of introduction automatic. Then I remembered. "Or I don't know, just Victoria, I guess." Elena did not correct me. She did not say, "Of course you are Victoria Mallory." She knew. I could see it in the way she looked at me, not scanning my chart, but scanning my face. "First nights are the worst," Elena said, leaning back on the stool. "The machinery is loud, the bed is hard, and your brain won't shut up." "I am scared," I admitted. It was the first time I had said it aloud since the screaming fit in Dr. Hayes's office. Elena nodded. She did not reach out to hold my hand, which I appreciated. I felt fragile, like if someone touched me, I might shatter. "You should be scared. This is scary stuff. Anyone who tells you to be brave right now is selling you something. You don't have to be brave tonight. You just have to get through the night." She looked at the empty chair where a parent should have been sleeping. She didn't comment on it directly, but she acknowledged the space. "It is going to be hard, Victoria," she said, her voice dropping to a register that felt like a secret pact. "The chemo is going to make you feel terrible before it makes you feel better. You are going to lose your hair. You are going to be tired in a way you have never been tired before. I'm not going to lie to you and say it is a walk in the park." She paused, locking eyes with me. "But you are not walking it alone, not on my shift." She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a deck of playing cards. The box was worn at the corners. "Do you know how to play gin rummy?" she asked. I blinked, thrown off by the sudden shift. A little. My grandmother taught me before she died." "Good," Elena said, shuffling the deck with a professional bridge. The The sound of the cards snapping together was rhythmic and comforting, a normal sound in an abnormal place. I need to stay awake, and the coffee in the break room tastes like battery acid tonight. Play a few hands with me? I sat up slowly. I was still weak, but the distraction was a lifeline. Okay. For the next hour, we didn't talk about cancer. We didn't talk about abandonment. We played cards on the rolling tray table. Elena was good. Ruthlessly good. She didn't let me win, which made me respect her immediately. Between hands, she started talking, not about me, but about herself. She filled the silence with pieces of her own life, building a bridge of words for me to walk on. I live in a tiny house about 20 minutes from here, she said, discarding a queen of hearts. It is just me and Miso. Miso? I asked, arranging my fan of cards. My cat. He is orange, fat, and believes he is the reincarnation of a dictator. Yesterday, he knocked a glass of water onto my laptop because I wasn't paying attention to him. Cost me $200 to fix the keyboard. I managed a small, weak smile. He sounds like a nightmare. He is, Elena agreed cheerfully. But he is my nightmare. The house feels too big without him. After my divorce, the silence was heavy. You know that kind of silence? The kind that presses on your ears? I nodded. I knew that silence intimately. It was the silence of my parents' house when I wasn't performing well enough. It was the silence of this room before she walked in. My ex-husband, Elena continued, picking up a card. He didn't understand the job. He didn't understand why I would come home sad, or why I couldn't just leave work at work. He wanted a wife who baked cookies and hosted dinner parties. I am a nurse who eats cereal for dinner and falls asleep watching reruns of old sitcoms. She looked at me, and her expression softened. I always wanted kids, though we tried, didn't happen, then we split up, and I thought about adopting. I looked up from my cards. You did? Yeah, Elena said. She set her cards down. I went to the seminars. I got the background checks. I have a spare bedroom that is currently full of boxes. But it is there. I never found the right match. Or maybe I was waiting for a sign. I wanted a kid who needed me as much as I needed them. Not just a placement, a connection. She looked at me then, and the air in the room shifted again. It wasn't just casual chatter. She was telling me something important. Victoria, she said, leaning forward slightly, I need to tell you something. I don't want you to think I just wandered in here by accident. I waited, my heart picking up speed. I am friends with the head nurse on the floor, Elena said. Nurses talk. We know everything that happens in this building before the doctors even put it in the charts. I heard about what happened in Dr. Hayes's office this afternoon. I looked down at the blanket, shame burning my cheeks. You heard they gave me away. I heard they made the biggest mistake of their lives, Elena corrected fiercely. And I heard that you were vulnerable. So, before I came on shift tonight, I called the social worker. I called Marla. My head snapped up. Why? To ask about the protection protocols, Elena said. I wanted to know the specific rules regarding your biological parents' access to you. Because sometimes, guilt makes people do strange things. They might come back, not to take you home, but to confuse you, to make themselves feel better. I wanted to make sure that if Derek or Gwen Mallory steps foot on this floor, security stops them at the elevator. I stared at her. My parents had treated me like a broken appliance. This woman, a stranger I had known for 40 minutes, was treating me like a fortress that needed to be defended. You did that for me? I did that for us, Elena said. Because I am your primary nurse now. I requested the assignment, and I don't like people messing with my patients. She picked up her cards again, signaling that the heavy conversation was over, but the impact remained. I watched her as she played. I noticed the way her eyes darted to the IV bag every few minutes, checking the flow rate. I noticed the small notebook she pulled out of her pocket to write down the exact time I took a sip of water. It wasn't just medical charting. I had seen nurses chart before. This was different. She was building a database. She was learning my rhythms. She noted that I rubbed my left ear when I was tired. She noted that I flinched when the overhead page went off. She was studying me, not like a specimen, but like a mother preparing for a war. She was gathering ammunition to keep me alive. We played until my eyelids felt like lead weights. The fear was still there, lurking at the edges of my mind. But it had been pushed back by the presence of this woman and her stories about a fat orange cat. "Okay," Elena said, gathering the cards. "That is enough. You need to sleep. Your body fights the cancer better when you are asleep. Will you stay?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Just until I fall asleep?" Elena stood up and tucked the cards back into her pocket. She adjusted my blanket, her hands gentle but firm. "I have rounds to do. Patients in room 304 need meds." My heart sank. Of course, she had a job. I was just one of many. "But," she continued, pulling the rolling chair closer to the bed instead of pushing it away, "I have about 10 minutes of paperwork to finish. I might as well do it here. The light is better." It was a lie. The light in the hallway was much better. But she sat down, opened her notebook, and started writing. I closed my eyes. I listened to the scratch of her pen against the paper. It was a steady, rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was the opposite of the sound of my parents signing the surrender papers. That sound had been an ending. This sound was a beginning. For the first time in 12 hours, my shoulders relaxed. I wasn't alone in the dark. There was a sentinel at the gate. I drifted off, the smell of antiseptic fading, replaced by the faint scent of the vanilla lotion Elena wore. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through the blinds. The chair was empty. Panic flared in my chest for a split second. Had I dreamt her? Had she abandoned me too? Then I saw it, taped to the plastic rail of my bed. Right where my eyes would land on it the moment I opened them was a small, yellow sticky note. The handwriting was jagged and hurried, written by someone who had stolen a few seconds from a busy shift to leave a message. It read, "My shift ends at 7, but I am back tonight. If you get scared, tell the day nurse to page me. If you need to call someone at 2 in the morning because the silence gets too loud, call me." Below the message was a phone number. I reached out and peeled the note off the rail. I held it in my hand, running my thumb over the ink. It was just a piece of paper. But in that moment, it weighed more than the metal around my neck ever would. It was the first piece of evidence in the case I would build against the world. I was worth sticking around for. The machinery of the state moves slowly, grinding gears that are rusted with bureaucracy and indifference. But Marla Winton moved like a hurricane. In the days following my abandonment, my hospital room became a makeshift legal command center. Marla was not the kind of social worker who wore cardigans and spoke in soft, therapeutic tones. She was a woman who wore sharp blazers and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been used to bludgeon people into compliance. She sat by my bed, her phone glued to her ear, navigating the labyrinth of the North Carolina family court system with a terrifying efficiency. I watched her from my pillow, feeling less like a human being and more like a disputed territory in a border war. The chemotherapy had started, and with it came a fatigue that felt like I was wearing a suit made of lead. My veins burned, my mouth tasted like metal. But while my body was fighting a civil war against my own blood cells, Marla was fighting the war outside. I need an emergency protective custody order, and I need it signed by Judge Holloway by noon. Marla barked into her phone one Tuesday morning. "No, I do not care that he is at lunch. This is a medical abandonment case involving a minor with a life-threatening condition. If I do not get that signature, I am going to park myself in his lobby until security drags me out." She hung up, looked at me, and offered a wink that was the only soft thing about her. "We are going to lock this down, Victoria. Nobody is moving you until I say so." That was the new reality. My parents, Gwen and Derek, were gone physically, but their shadow loomed over the paperwork. Marla explained to me, in language that was surprisingly adult, that she was filing for a status that would strip them of their decision-making power. She wasn't just protecting me from their neglect. She was protecting me from their whims. While Marla handled the law, Elena handled the life. Elena was technically the night nurse, which meant her shift ended at 7 in the morning, but the hospital rules seemed to bend around her. She would clock out, disappear for an hour to shower and change, and then reappear in my room with a stack of magazines, a crossword puzzle book, or sometimes just a quiet presence that made the nausea bearable. She wasn't being paid for those hours. I knew that. The hospital administration was strict about overtime. She was there as a volunteer, a friend, a guardian angel in civilian clothes. She sat in the corner chair, reading thick paperback novels while I dozed in and out of a chemical fog. When I woke up retching, she was there with a basin and a cool washcloth before I could even ring the call button. When the bone pain hit, a deep, throbbing ache that felt like my skeleton was trying to expand inside my skin, she knew exactly how to position the pillows to relieve the pressure. But the most telling moments were the ones that happened outside the room. My biological parents never came back. Not once. They did not send a card. They did not send a stuffed animal. But they did call. I overheard Dr. Hayes talking to Marla in the hallway one afternoon. My door was cracked open just a sliver, and their voices carried. "They called the main desk again, Doctor," Hayes said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Mr. Mallory wanted to know the estimated date of discharge." "Did he ask how she is responding to the chemo?" Marla asked. "No. He asked if the discharge date would fall before or after the 1st of the month. He is calculating billing cycles. Marla, he is treating his daughter's cancer treatment like a car rental return. He wants to know when the meter stops running." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They were tracking me, not because they missed me, but because they were terrified that some clerical error might link a bill back to their address. They were monitoring the situation to ensure their liability remained at zero. But then, the twist came. The moment that turned their indifference into something criminal. It happened on a Friday. I remember because the cafeteria served pizza on Fridays, and the smell of the tomato sauce was making me nauseous. Dr. Hayes walked into my room, and for the first time, he didn't look tired. He looked furious. Marla was right behind him, her face set in a grim line. "Victoria," Doctor, Hayes said gently, "I need to check your vitals." He went through the motions, but his eyes were distracted. Once he was done, he turned to Marla. "Tell her. She is old enough to understand why things are about to get very strict." Marla pulled the chair close. "Victoria, something happened with the insurance company today. The hospital billing department ran a routine audit on the claim your father filed before he left." I swallowed hard. "Did they deny it?" "Not exactly," Marla said. "It appears that on the morning you were admitted, about 2 hours before you arrived at the emergency room, your father called the insurance provider. He attempted to lower the coverage tier of the family plan. He tried to remove the catastrophic care rider to save on the monthly premium." My brain took a moment to process this. He tried to cancel the insurance? "He tried to gut it, Doctor," Hayes corrected, his voice shaking with anger. "He knew you were sick. He suspected it was serious. And before he brought you in, he tried to strip the policy down to the bare minimum so that when the abandonment went through, the insurance company wouldn't have grounds to pursue him for the premiums on a high-cost plan. He was trying to sabotage the coverage so the state would have to pick up the tab faster." "It is fraud," Marla said bluntly. "Or at least, it borders on it. But because the change hadn't processed before you were admitted, the original coverage stands. However, the intent was clear. They weren't just overwhelmed parents making a panic decision. They were executing a financial strategy." "A strategy? I wasn't a child to them. I was a bad stock they were trying to dump before the market closed." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means," Marla said, snapping her briefcase shut, "that Dr. Hayes and I have successfully petitioned the court to completely sever their access to your medical records immediately." Usually, parents have a right to know medical updates even during temporary separation. But given this maneuver, the judge agreed that their involvement is a liability to your care. They are locked out. Victoria, they cannot call the nurse's station. They cannot see your charts. As far as they are concerned, you are a black box. I felt a strange mixture of relief and hollowness. I was officially an orphan of the system. So who signs for me? I asked. Who says yes to the surgeries? Who talks to the doctors? Doctor. Hayes looked at Elena, who was standing quietly in the corner, mixing a saline flush. The state is the legal guardian. Doctor, Hayes said. But practically speaking, we need a designated contact person for the day-to-day, someone who knows the protocol, someone who is here. He didn't finish the sentence, but the room turned to Elena. Elena didn't look up from her work. She just capped the syringe and said, I have already updated my contact info with the school district so they can send her homework here, and I spoke to the hospital psychologist about setting up sessions for next week. I am handling it. She said it so simply. I am handling it. Like it was the most natural thing in the world for a night nurse to take on the administrative burden of a teenage cancer patient. From that day on, the dynamic shifted. Elena wasn't just my friend. She was my proxy. When the oncologists came in for rounds, they didn't look at the empty chair where my parents should have been. They looked at Elena. She asked the hard questions. She asked about white blood cell counts, about hydration levels, about the side effects of the intrathecal chemotherapy. She took notes in her little notebook, her handwriting becoming the only record of my battle. One afternoon, I was being wheeled down to radiology for a scan. I was bald now, my head wrapped in a soft knit beanie Elena had brought me. I looked frail, a ghost of the girl I had been 2 weeks ago. Elena was pushing the wheelchair, chatting about Miso the cat's latest war against her curtains. A technician I didn't recognize met us at the door of the radiology suite. He looked at his clipboard, then at Elena. Okay, Mom, you can wait in the designated area right over there while we take her back, the technician said. Gesturing to a waiting room, the world seemed to pause for a second. Mom, I froze. I waited for the correction. I waited for Elena to say, oh, I am not her mother. I am just her nurse. I waited for the awkward explanation that always followed. The pitying look when people realized I was the abandonment case everyone was whispering about. But Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't correct him. All right, Elena said smoothly, giving my shoulder a squeeze. I will be right here. 2 minutes. Victoria, you got this? She let go of the wheelchair, and the technician rolled me away. I looked back at her. She was already pulling out her book, settling into the chair as if she had every right to that title. And in my chest, right where the hollow ache usually lived, something warm bloomed. My heart didn't reject the title. It didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a promotion she had earned in the trenches. The weeks dragged into a month. The induction phase of the chemotherapy was brutal, but effective. My counts were stabilizing. The cancer was retreating, beaten back by the poison we were pumping into my veins. Then came the meeting I had been dreading. Marla came in on a Thursday afternoon. She looked tired. Her blazer was wrinkled, and she had a file tucked under her arm that looked thick and ominous. Elena was there, sitting on the edge of my bed, helping me sort through the mountain of makeup work my school had sent over. We need to talk about the next steps, Marla said, pulling up a chair. Her voice was serious, lacking its usual combativeness. I put down my math worksheet. Am I dying? No, Marla said quickly. No, Victoria. The opposite. Doctor, Hayes says you are responding beautifully. You are hitting remission targets, which means you are approaching discharge. Discharge. The word should have been a celebration. Going home, but I had no home. The yellow house in Highland Park was forbidden to me. Okay, I said, my voice small. Where do I go? Marla opened the file. Since you are in state custody, the standard protocol is placement in a foster home. I have been working the phones. It is hard to place a teenager. especially one with significant medical needs. Most foster families are not equipped to handle the follow-up appointments, the medication schedules, the immunocompromised status. She took a breath. But I found a placement. There's a family in Greensboro, the Davises. They have fostered medically fragile children before. They are willing to take you. I felt the tears prick my eyes. Greensboro was 2 hours away. It was a strange city, a strange house, strange people who were being paid by the state to make sure I didn't die. They seem capable, Marla said, though she didn't sound convinced. It is the best option the system has right now. I looked at Elena. She was staring at Marla, her face unreadable. Her hands were resting on her lap, clenched into fists. I don't want to go to Greensboro, I whispered. I don't know them. I know, honey, Marla said gently, but the hospital cannot keep you once you are medically cleared, and you cannot go back to the Mallorys. This is the only bed available. No, a voice cut through the room. It wasn't me. Marla turned. I turned. Elena stood up. She wasn't wearing her scrubs. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking like a normal person, but her posture was steel. She is not going to Greensboro, Elena said. Her voice was not loud, but it had a finality that made the air vibrate. She is not going to some strangers who are going to treat her like a medical project. Elena, Marla sighed, rubbing her temples. We have discussed this. You are a single woman. You work night shifts. The state requires a stable, two-parent home for high-needs placements usually, or at least a caregiver with flexible hours. You can't just— I have accrued 6 weeks of vacation time, Elena interrupted. I have already spoken to the nursing supervisor about switching to day shifts or part-time when that runs out. My mother lives 2 towns over and can help when I'm at work. Elena walked over to the bed and stood between me and Marla, placing herself physically between me and the system. I have a spare bedroom, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly now, not with fear, but with intensity. I have a car that is reliable. I know her vein access protocols better than anyone. I know she likes her toast cut into triangles and she hates the cherry-flavored medicine. She looked directly at Marla. I am certified as a foster parent. I took the classes 3 years ago. My license is active. I checked. Marla blinked. You are active? I am, Elena said, and I am invoking kinship care, not by blood, but by bond. There is a provision for it. You know there is. It is irregular, Marla warned. The conflict of interest, you were her nurse. I am her nurse, Elena corrected, and I am the only person in this world who has actually shown up for her every single day. You want to put her in a house with strangers 2 hours away? Go ahead. But you will have to drag her past me to do it. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was high. She comes home with me, Elena said. That is the plan. Make the paperwork fit the plan. Marla. I looked at Elena, this woman who had found me in the dark, and for the first time since the diagnosis, the crushing weight on my chest lifted. I wasn't an invoice anymore. I wasn't a case number. I was wanted. Marla looked at Elena, then at me. She looked at the determination on Elena's face, a ferocity that no amount of bureaucracy could crush. A slow smile spread across the social worker's face. She closed the file on the Davis family in Greensboro. Well, Marla said, clicking her pen, if you are already licensed, that does simplify things. I suppose I can argue that continuity of care is the priority. She looked at me. Victoria, what do you think? Do you want to go live with the lady who owns the mean cat? I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. Right, Marla said, standing up. I have a judge to harass. Pack your bags. Kid, you are going home. The drive to Brookhaven was quiet, but it was not the suffocating silence I had grown used to in the Mallory household. It was a companionable silence, filled only by the hum of Elena's old sedan and the radio playing low-volume jazz. I watched the landscape change from the sterile gray of the hospital district to the lush, green canopy of the suburbs, but these were not the manicured, gated suburbs where I had grown up. The lawns here were a little overgrown. The fences were wooden and weathered, and there were tricycles left on driveways. It looked messy. It looked alive. When we pulled up to the house, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. It was a small bungalow with peeling white paint and a porch that leaned slightly to the left. It was nothing like the brick fortress my parents owned. But as Elena turned off the engine, she looked at me and smiled. "Welcome to the chaotic headquarters of Griffin and Miso," she said. I learned later that the transition had been smoother than Marla expected, because Elena had been ready. She had completed her foster care certification 2 years prior, a detail she had kept quiet. It was as if she had prepared a landing strip for a plane she didn't know was coming. The state had inspected the home, approved the background checks, and stamped the forms before I even knew I was sick. Fate, it seemed, had placed a reservation on the spare room long before I needed it. Elena led me inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and old books. Miso, the orange tabby I had heard so much about, was asleep on top of the refrigerator, his tail twitching as we entered, but it was the hallway to the right that stopped me dead in my tracks. "Go on," Elena said, nodding toward the second door. "That is your space." I pushed the door open and froze. The walls were painted a soft, pale purple. It wasn't just any purple. It was lavender. I stood there, gripping the doorframe. I remembered a conversation from 3 weeks ago, late at night in the hospital, when the nausea was bad and I was babbling about anything to keep my mind off the pain. I had mentioned, in passing, that my room at home was beige because Gwen said it was better for resale value, but I had always wanted lavender walls. I had said it once, in a drug-induced haze. Elena had remembered. She had painted the room while I was sleeping off my last round of chemo. "I didn't have time to do the trim," Elena said apologetically from behind me. "But I thought it was better than hospital white." I turned to look at her, my throat tight. "You remembered." "I listen," she said simply. Life in Brookhaven settled into a rhythm that was terrifyingly normal. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for the bill. I was waiting for the resentment, but all I got was oatmeal. My stomach was still a wreck from the treatment, so our meals were a parade of bland foods. Elena became a connoisseur of broth and toast. We spent our evenings on the lumpy couch, wrapped in soft wool blankets that didn't scratch my sensitive skin, watching black and white movies because the plots were simple and the volume wasn't jarring. There was a large calendar on the kitchen wall. In my old life, calendars were for deadlines, SAT prep, and social obligations. Elena's calendar was covered in stickers. There were bright green stars for good blood count days and little cartoon doctors for checkups. It wasn't a schedule of obligations. It was a map of survival. But the most important part of the routine happened every morning. I would wake up, usually tired, usually feeling the phantom weight of the burden label my father had branded me with. I would walk into the kitchen, and Elena would be there, pouring coffee. She would look at me, put down the pot, and say the same thing, every single day. "Victoria, I am happy you are here." It wasn't, "I am happy you are getting better," or "I am happy you are being good." It was just, "I am happy you are here." At first, I didn't believe her. I thought it was a foster parent script. I tried to deflect it. I tried to make myself invisible. I folded my laundry immediately. I washed my own dishes until my hands were raw. I turned off lights the second I left a room. I was trying to minimize my carbon footprint in her life, trying to cost her as little as possible so she wouldn't realize I was a bad investment. That strategy crumbled on a Tuesday evening. I had woken up thirsty around 2 a.m. and crept out to the kitchen. The light over the stove was on, and I saw papers spread out on the small round table. Elena was asleep with her head on her arms, a calculator near her elbow. I walked closer, my socks silent on the linoleum. I looked at the papers. They were shift schedules. I knew Elena's schedule. She worked 4 days a week at the hospital. But the paper in front of me showed her name down for 3 extra night shifts at a private urgent care clinic across town. My eyes scanned the other papers. There were receipts, One for the organic produce she insisted on buying because the doctor said pesticides were bad for my compromised immune system. One for the high-end air purifier in my room. One for the gas to drive me to the specialist in Chapel Hill. I did the math in my head. The stipend the state provided for a foster child covered the basics: standard food, rent, utilities. It did not cover the premium life Elena was giving me. She was working herself into exhaustion to close the gap. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with cancer. I was doing it again. I was draining someone dry. The next morning, we were at the grocery store. Elena reached for a carton of the expensive strawberries I liked. "No," I said sharply, grabbing her wrist. Elena looked at me, surprised. "What is wrong? Are you feeling sick?" "They are $6, I said, my voice trembling. "Get the frozen ones. They are $2. Fresh is better for you right now," Elena said, reaching for the carton again. "I don't need them," I snapped, pulling the cart away. "And we don't need the expensive bread, and I can just use the regular soap. I don't need the hypoallergenic one. Stop spending money on me." People in the aisle turned to look. I didn't care. I was hyperventilating. "I saw your schedule, Elena. I saw the extra shifts. You are working yourself to death because I'm expensive. Just stop. Treat me like a ward of the state. Not a princess. I am not worth the overtime." Elena went very still. The playfulness vanished from her face. She took the cart from my hands and pushed it to the side of the aisle, right next to a display of canned soup. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a flash of anger in her eyes. It wasn't at me, it was for me. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low and fierce, "and listen good, because I am only going to say this once." She crouched down slightly so we were eye to eye. "I pick up those shifts because I want to. I buy these strawberries because they make you smile, and God knows you haven't had enough reasons to smile lately. Money is renewable. Victoria, you are not." "But I am a burden," I whispered, the old programming firing in my brain. My dad said, "Your father," Elena cut in, spitting the word out like a curse, "was a weak man who treated his family like a hedge fund. I am not him, and you are not a line item in a budget." She took my shoulders in her hands, her grip firm. "Do not practice shrinking yourself. Do not learn how to take up less space just to make someone else comfortable. Do not make yourself small to fit inside someone else's fear. If I have to work an extra shift to buy you the good fruit, that is my choice. Your job is to eat the fruit and get strong. That is the deal. Do you understand?" I looked at her, stunned. Nobody had ever given me permission to take up space before. "Do you understand?" she repeated. "Yes," I choked out. "Good," she said, standing up and tossing the $6 strawberries into the cart. "Now let's go get the hypoallergenic soap." That was the turning point. But the healing wasn't just about food and shelter, it was about the mind. A week later, Elena drove me to a small brick building downtown. "I don't need a shrink," I said, crossing my arms as she parked the car. "I am not crazy. I have leukemia." "The leukemia is being handled by the oncologists," Elena said, turning off the engine. "They are poisoning the cancer. That is the easy part." "Then why are we here?" "Because," Elena said, looking out the windshield, "cancer attacks the body, but being left behind, being disposed of, that attacks the soul. Medicine fixes the blood. Victoria, but abandonment is an injury that requires time and presence to heal. You need to learn how to trust that the floor isn't going to drop out from under you again." She turned to me. "I can fix your fever. I can't fix the voice in your head that tells you you aren't enough. Doctor, Aris can help with that." So I went. I sat in a comfortable chair and talked about the cold yellow room. I talked about the signing of the papers. I talked about the receipt. And slowly, session by session, the tightness in my chest began to loosen. It was a rainy Tuesday in November when the final wall came down. We were in the living room. The rain was hammering against the roof, a cozy, drumming sound. I was doing homework at the coffee table, and Elena was reading on the couch. The house was warm. The air smelled of the pot roast she had made for dinner. I was stuck on a biology problem. I chewed the end of my pencil, frustrated. Without thinking, without calculating, without checking the atmosphere, I spoke. "Mom, do you remember what the mitochondria does?" The word hung in the air. Mom. I froze. My heart stopped beating for a second. I hadn't meant to say it. It was a reflex, a biological imperative triggered by safety and warmth. I waited for the awkwardness. I waited for her to pause, to make a big deal out of it, to cry, or to tell me not to get attached. The silence stretched for 2 seconds. "The powerhouse of the cell," Elena said from the couch. She didn't look up from her book. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't gasp. She just answered the question. "It generates most of the chemical energy needed to power the cell's biochemical reactions," she added. Turning a page, I stared at the back of her book. My eyes burned by not making it a moment. She had made it the most important moment of my life. She had accepted the title as if it had always been hers. She didn't need a ceremony. She just needed to be there. "Right," I said, my voice thick. "Powerhouse of the cell. Thanks." "Anytime," she said. 2 months later. The snow was falling in Brookhaven. I was officially in remission. My hair was starting to grow back in soft, fuzzy patches. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and Elena placed a thick envelope in front of me. "This came today," she said. I looked at the return address. It was from the Department of Social Services. "Is it bad news?" I asked, reaching for my water. "No," Elena said. She sat down opposite me, clasping her hands on the table. She looked nervous for the first time since I had known her. "It is the next step." She took a deep breath. "The state is satisfied with the placement. They are moving to close the temporary guardianship file, which means we have a choice. You can remain in the foster system. Stay here as a long-term placement until you are 18. She paused. "Or?" I asked. "Or," Elena said, pushing the envelope toward me. "We can file for adoption, permanent, irrevocable, no more social workers, no more monthly reviews." She looked me in the eye. "I know you have a family. I know you have a history. I am not trying to erase that, but I am asking if you want to build something new." She waited, her eyes searching mine. "My name," she said softly. "It is not a wealthy name. It doesn't come with a country club membership or a trust fund. It is just a nurse's name. But it is clean, and it is steady." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Do you want to be a griffin, Victoria?" I looked at the envelope. I thought about Derek Mallory and his calculator. I thought about Gwen and her image. And then I looked at the woman who worked double shifts to buy me strawberries. The woman who painted my room lavender. The woman who taught me that I was allowed to take up space. I turned my hand over and squeezed hers back. "Yes," I said. I really do." The ink on the adoption papers was black, permanent, and absolutely beautiful. It happened in a quiet courtroom in downtown Brookhaven, devoid of the drama that had marked my exit from the Mallory family. There were no shouting matches, no negotiations about money, and no lawyers checking their watches. There was just Judge Halloway, who looked over his spectacles at Elena and asked if she understood that she was taking legal responsibility for a teenager with a complex medical history. Elena did not hesitate. She signed the document with a flourish, the scratch of her pen sounding like a lock clicking shut on a safe. When we walked out of the courthouse, the sun was hitting the pavement hard. I looked at my driver's license, which would need to be changed, and felt a strange lightness in my chest. For 13 years, the name Mallory had felt like a brand, a logo for a corporation that demanded high performance and low maintenance. Griffin felt different. It felt like a warm blanket. It felt like the lavender paint on my bedroom walls. It did not erase the scar on my chest where the central line had been, but it changed the story of how that scar got there. With the legal battle over, the real war began, the war for my future. I had missed nearly a year of school. Between the chemotherapy, the hospital stays, and the sheer exhaustion of recovery, I had fallen into an academic black hole. The school district had sent a tutor, a nice woman who smelled like peppermint and tried her best. But I was miles behind. In the Mallory house, this would have been a crisis. It would have been a shameful failure to be hidden from the neighbors. In the Griffin house, it was a tactical challenge. Elena treated my education the exact same way she treated a patient crashing in the ICU. She did not panic. She assessed the damage, triaged the priorities, and executed a protocol. "We are not going to try to learn everything at once," Elena announced one evening, clearing the dinner plates to make room for a stack of textbooks that looked like a tower of bricks. "We are going to treat this systemically. Math is the vital signs. We need to get those stable first. History and English are the long-term therapy." She bought a giant whiteboard and mounted it in the hallway. It was color-coded: red for urgent assignments, blue for upcoming tests, green for long-term projects. She taught me how to study using the same mnemonic devices she used to memorize drug interactions. "Don't just read the chapter," she told me, tapping a biology book with a highlighter. "Diagnose it. What is the main function of this cell? What happens when it fails? If you understand the mechanism, you don't have to memorize the definition." I realized quickly that I wasn't just catching up. I was accelerating. My brain, which had been in survival mode for so long, was hungry. I devoured biology. It wasn't abstract to me anymore. When the textbook talked about mitosis and cellular mutations, I didn't see diagrams. I saw the enemy I had fought in the dark. I saw the reason my hair had fallen out. I saw the mechanism that had almost killed me, and I wanted to understand it so I could dismantle it. I started a project for my return to the classroom. It was supposed to be a simple biology presentation, something to get a grade in the book, but I couldn't do simple, not with this. I gathered data, I pulled my own medical records, with Elena's permission, and anonymized them. I went online and found data sets from pediatric oncology studies. I built a project titled "The Long-Term Cognitive and Physical Impacts of Intrathecal Chemotherapy in Adolescent Survivors." It was heavy. It was dense with graphs and chemical structures. My teacher, Mr. Henderson, looked at it and suggested I enter it into the regional science fair. I won. Then I won the district. Then came the invitation to the North Carolina State Science and Engineering Fair. It was being held in Raleigh, a 3-hour drive away. It was a 2-day event requiring a hotel stay, registration fees, and gas money. I looked at the invitation letter on the kitchen counter. I looked at the fee schedule: $200 for registration, another $150 for the hotel, gas, food, the old voice in my head, the one that sounded like Derek Mallory. "Woke up. You are too expensive. You are a drain." I hid the letter. I told Mr. Henderson that my mother couldn't take off work, so I would take the bus with the school team and stay in the chaperone rooms. I told him I didn't need any family passes for the award ceremony, because it was too far of a drive for a nurse who worked night shifts. I managed the logistics so that I would cost Elena Griffin exactly $0 and 0 hours of lost sleep. The fair was held in a massive convention center. It was a sea of trifold boards, nervous teenagers in ill-fitting suits, and judges with clipboards. I stood by my project for 8 hours, explaining the toxicity of methotrexate to strangers. I felt a fierce, cold pride. I was doing this alone. I was standing on my own 2 feet, proving that I could be excellent without being a burden. The award ceremony was on the second afternoon. The auditorium was vast, filled with parents holding flowers and balloons. I sat in the back with the other kids whose parents couldn't make it. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I preferred it this way. Independence was my armor. The announcer began reading the names for the category of biomedical and health sciences. 3rd place, 2nd place, and the 1st place winner, moving on to the nationals, Victoria Griffin. The applause was loud. I stood up, my legs feeling slightly numb. I walked down the long aisle toward the stage. I was smiling, but it was a practiced smile. I wished, just for a fraction of a second, that someone in that crowd knew that the data on the board wasn't just numbers. It was my life. I accepted the plaque. I shook the judge's hand. I turned to look out at the audience, the blinding spotlight making it hard to see. And then I saw her. Standing in the very back row, right near the exit doors, was a woman in navy blue scrubs. She looked exhausted. Her hair was coming out of its bun. She was holding a large, crinkled Dunkin' Donuts coffee cup in one hand and a cheap bouquet of grocery store carnations in the other. It was Elena. She wasn't clapping politely. She was whistling. A loud, piercing, two-finger whistle that cut through the polite applause of the suburban parents. I froze on stage. My heart hammered against my ribs. How? I hadn't told her. I had hidden the letter. I walked off the stage and practically ran up the aisle. She met me by the doors. She smelled of antiseptic, floor wax, and the distinct, sharp scent of the hospital break room. She had clearly come straight from a 12-hour shift. "You," I said, breathless, "you are not supposed to be here." "And you," Elena said, handing me the flowers and pulling me into a hug that smelled like safety, "are a terrible liar." "But the shift," I stammered into her shoulder. "The gas money, the registration fee. I told the school to waive the guest tickets." Elena pulled back and looked me in the eye. Her expression was stern, the same look she gave me when I refused to eat my protein. "Mr. Henderson emailed me 2 weeks ago to ask if I needed directions," she said. "He assumed I knew. When I realized you hadn't told me, I knew exactly why." She took a sip of her coffee, her eyes softening. "Victoria, I traded shifts with Susan. I drove 3 hours on 4 hours of sleep. I parked in a garage that cost $20. And I would have paid 10 times that to see you faceplant or win. It doesn't matter. You don't get to decide when I show up. I am the mom. That is the job description. I show up." I looked at the plaque in my hand, then at the woman who looked like she was about to collapse from fatigue but was standing there like a statue of victory. The armor I had built, the independence, the need to be low maintenance, cracked, and it felt good. "I won," I whispered. "I know," she grinned. "Now let's go. I need to drive back before I fall asleep. And you need to tell me everything about that project regarding what was it? Intra-something chemo?" The ride back was a blur of exhaustion and happiness. But winning the science fair opened a door I hadn't expected. It gave me an identity that wasn't the sick girl or the abandoned girl. I was the smart girl. I started making friends. Real ones. Not the social climbers my sister Paige used to hang out with. I joined a support group for teenage cancer survivors that met in the hospital basement on Thursdays. We called it the Chemo Club, a dark joke that made the adults uncomfortable, but made us laugh. I learned to talk about my past without choking on the words. I learned that saying my parents left me was a statement of fact, not a confession of guilt. I met a boy named Marcus who had lost a leg to osteosarcoma. We compared scars like war medals. For the first time, I felt like I belonged to a tribe, but the ghost of the Mallorys still lingered in the digital world. Paige texted me sporadically. It was never a phone call, always a text, and the content was always a subtle interrogation, a way for her to gather data to report back to headquarters. "Hey V." A text read one Tuesday afternoon. "Mom wants to know if you got into the AP chemistry class. She says colleges look for that sophomore year." I stared at the screen. Not "how are you?" Not "did your checkup go okay?" Just a query about AP chemistry. I realized then that to them, I was still a reflection of their status. If I succeeded, they could tell themselves that their decision to abandon me was tough love or for the best. If I failed, they could justify that I was always troubled. They needed my grades to validate their narrative. I typed back, "I got in." I didn't tell her I had the highest grade in the class. I didn't tell her about the science fair win. I didn't tell her about the dean's list. I gave them the minimum data required to keep them silent. I was a footnote in their lives, a "see also" reference at the bottom of the page. but they were becoming a footnote in mine, too. That summer, sitting on the back porch with Miso the cat attacking my shoelaces, I made a decision. I was looking at the pamphlets for colleges. Elena was inside, humming as she cooked dinner. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be a business executive like Derek. I didn't want a job that was about accumulating leverage. I looked at my biology textbook. I looked at the scar on my chest. I wanted to be the person standing in the room when the world fell apart for a 13-year-old kid. I wanted to be the one who could look at a terrified set of parents and say, I know what this is, and I know how to fight it. I walked into the kitchen. Elena was chopping carrots. Mom, I said. She turned. Yeah? I know what I want to do, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of Victoria Griffin. Oh? She wiped her hands on a towel. I am going to med school, I said. I am going to be a pediatric oncologist. Elena looked at me for a long moment. She saw the weight of it. She knew what it meant. Returning to the place of my trauma every single day for the rest of my life. Are you doing this to prove them wrong? She asked quietly. Because that is a heavy fuel to burn for a whole career. No, I said, and I meant it. I am not doing it for them. I am doing it because Dr. Hayes saved my life, and you saved my soul. I want to do both. Elena smiled, a slow, proud smile that lit up the kitchen. Well then, she said, reaching for the cutting board again. We better start looking at scholarships. Med school is expensive, and Miso has no savings. I laughed. It was the first time I laughed about money in years. The loop was closing. The victim was dead. The doctor was being born. Hawthorne College was not the Ivy League playground my sister Paige had aimed for. It was a gritty brick-and-mortar institution that smelled of coffee, old paper, and ambition. It was a place for people who could not afford to fail. I attacked my undergraduate years the same way a surgeon attacks a tumor, with precision, aggression, and zero wasted movement. I carried a course load that made my academic advisor nervous. 18 credits a semester, summer sessions, winter intersessions. I was not there to find myself. I was there to build a resume that would be bulletproof. My life was a triad of biology labs, library cubicles, and the teaching assistant office. I secured a position as a TA for the Intro to Biology course during my sophomore year, a job usually reserved for grad students, but I had annoyed the department head until he hired me just to make me stop emailing him. It paid $12 an hour. It wasn't much, but every $12 was a meal, or a fraction of a textbook, or a way to keep the heating bill down at the house in Brookhaven. I maintained a 4.0 grade point average. It wasn't about intelligence, it was about fear. I was terrified that if I slipped, even for a second, the ground would open up and swallow me whole. I was still the girl in the hospital bed waiting for a bill I couldn't pay. Elena tried to slow me down. She would call me on Tuesday nights, her voice thick with the fatigue of her own double shifts. Victoria, she would say, I saw your schedule. You have a lab that ends at 9 at night and a shift at the tutoring center that starts at 7 in the morning. When do you sleep? I sleep in the gaps, I would tell her, cradling the phone against my ear as I walked rapidly across the quad. I am fine, Mom. I just want to help with the tuition. I don't want you taking on more shifts. Stop it. Elena's voice would turn sharp. We have a deal. Your job is to build the future. My job is to keep the roof over our heads. Do not try to do my job. Victoria, you are not qualified for it. She made it sound like a joke, but I knew the reality. I went home one weekend in October of my junior year to do laundry and steal some of her leftovers. Elena was at work. I was looking for a stamp in the junk drawer in the kitchen, the drawer where everyone keeps batteries, rubber bands, and secrets. I found an envelope buried under a stack of takeout menus. It was from the bank. It wasn't a bill. It was a notification of approval for a second mortgage on the house. I stood there in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator sounding like a roar in my ears. The amount listed was substantial, $30,000. The interest rate was high. I sat down at the kitchen table, the paper shaking in my hand. She hadn't told me. She had leveraged the only asset she owned, the house that was her sanctuary, just to make sure I didn't have to take out student loans that would cripple me later. She was betting her retirement on my success. I put the paper back exactly where I found it. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. To confront her would be to insult her sacrifice. Instead, I turned my guilt into fuel. If she was betting the house on me, I was going to make sure the return on investment was astronomical. The opportunity came 2 months later, the Hawthorne Medical Fellowship. It was the most prestigious grant the college offered. It covered the entirety of the senior year tuition and provided a stipend for medical school applications. It was competitive, viciously so. The application required a personal essay. The prompt was simple. Describe the person who has most shaped your moral character. I sat in the library at 3 a.m, the cursor on my laptop blinking at me. I could have written about Dr. Hayes. I could have written about a famous scientist. Instead, I wrote about a woman who bought $6 strawberries. I wrote about the concept of motherhood, not as a biological inevitability, but as a deliberate, daily act of rescue. I wrote about the difference between the people who sign a birth certificate and the person who signs a chemotherapy consent form. I wrote with a raw, bleeding honesty. I described the yellow hospital room. I described the silence of the phone that never rang. And I described the woman who sat in a chair for 12 hours straight just so I wouldn't wake up alone. I didn't use real names, but the story was unmistakable. I titled it, The Biology of Blood versus the Anatomy of Love. I submitted it and tried to forget about it. 3 weeks later, I was called into the dean's office. I thought I was in trouble. I thought perhaps I had violated some honor code by working too many hours. Dean Sterling was a formidable woman with silver hair and a reputation for being impossible to impress. She was sitting at her desk, my essay in front of her. She looked up when I entered. "Miss Griffin," she said. "Yes, Dean?" "I have been on this committee for 20 years, she said, tapping the paper. "I have read thousands of essays about inspiring grandfathers and dedicated teachers. She paused. "This is the first time I have ever cried in my office." She took off her glasses. "The committee was unanimous. You have the fellowship. And frankly, I would like to shake your mother's hand at graduation." I walked out of that office and leaned against the brick wall of the corridor. Breathing hard. I had done it. The tuition was covered. The house in Brookhaven was safe. I called Elena immediately when I told her. She didn't scream. She just went very quiet. And then I heard the unmistakable sound of her crying on the other end of the line. "I told you," she choked out. "I told you to bet on yourself. But success, I learned, sends out a signal. It is a frequency that even the people who discarded you can pick up." The fellowship win was published on the college website. It was a puff piece, featuring my photo and a sanitized version of my story about overcoming early childhood health struggles. 2 days after the article went live, I got an email. It appeared in my student inbox, sandwiched between a reminder about library fines and a syllabus update. The sender name made my blood turn to ice. From Derek Mallory. Subject: Congratulations. I stared at the screen. My hand hovered over the mouse. Part of me wanted to delete it unread. Part of me needed to know. I clicked it open. Victoria, your mother and I saw the news about your fellowship online. A friend sent us the link. We are very proud to see you doing so well. We always knew you had potential. It has been a long time. We think about you often. Things have been a bit complicated for us lately. The economy has been tough on the firm, and your sister has had some challenges. We would love to catch up if you are ever in the area. Perhaps grab a coffee? Family is important. After all, best, Dad. I read it 3 times. Dad. He signed it, Dad. The audacity was breathtaking. There was no apology, no mention of the hospital, no mention of the 13 years of silence. Just a vague, "we are proud," and a hint about their own financial struggles. The economy has been tough. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because I was winning. They were sniffing around to see if the asset they liquidated was suddenly valuable again. My fingers twitched over the keyboard. I wanted to reply. I wanted to type out a list of every night I spent vomiting from chemo. I wanted to attach a PDF of the adoption papers. I wanted to scream at them in all caps. But then I looked at the framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of Elena and me at the science fair, holding the trophy. If I responded, I gave them access. If I responded, I acknowledged that they still had the power to make me angry. I moved the cursor to the trash icon. I clicked once. The email vanished. I didn't block them. That would show I cared. I just deleted them. Silence. That was my boundary. That was my weapon. I was not going to give them a single word. While I was ascending, the Mallory dynasty was cracking. I didn't seek out news about them, but the world is small, and the legal community in North Carolina is smaller. I heard the rumors through a pre-law friend at Hawthorne. "Did you hear about that girl at Duke Law?" my friend Sarah asked over lunch one day. "Paige Mallory? Total scandal." I kept eating my salad, my heart skipping a beat. "What about her?" "Plagiarism." Sarah lowered her voice. "Apparently, she lifted half of her moot court brief from an old case file without citation. It was blatant. She should have been expelled." "Should have been?" I asked. "Yeah. Word is her daddy made a donation, or pulled some strings. She got a slap on the wrist and a temporary suspension, but her reputation is trash. No big firm is going to hire her." I nodded, sipping my water. It made perfect sense. Paige had learned the family lesson well. Appearances matter more than substance. If you can't earn it, buy it. If you can't buy it, steal it. And if you get caught, pay someone to look the other way. They were still playing the game of images. They were still covering up the cracks in the foundation with expensive wallpaper, but I was building a foundation of stone. Senior year flew by in a blur of applications and interviews. I applied to 10 medical schools. I got interviews at 8, but there was only one I really wanted. Stonebridge University School of Medicine. It was close to home. It had one of the best pediatric oncology programs in the country, and it was the hospital where Dr. Hayes worked. It was the place where I had been abandoned. And I wanted to walk back into those doors not as a patient, but as a colleague. The letter came in March. I didn't open it at school. I drove home to Brookhaven. I put the envelope on the kitchen table. Elena sat across from me. Miso sat on the table, sniffing the paper. "Do it," Elena whispered. I tore the envelope open. My hands were shaking, just like they used to when I was 13. I unfolded the heavy, cream-colored paper. "Dear Miss Griffin, it is our distinct pleasure to inform you I stopped reading." I looked up at Elena. The tears were already streaming down my face. "I got in." Elena let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She came around the table and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "Dr. Griffin," she whispered into my hair. "It has a nice ring to it." That night, lying in my lavender room, I thought about the future. I thought about the graduation ceremony that would happen in 4 years. I thought about the dean's medal. And I thought about Gwen and Derek. I knew they would come back. Now that I was going to be a doctor, now that the investment had matured into a high-yield asset, they would try again. They would want the photo op. They would want the credit. I made a vow to myself in the dark. When that day came, I would not scream. I would not cause a scene. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing a hurt child. I would be a mirror. I would reflect their own choices back at them with such clarity that they would have no place to hide. I would let the truth do the heavy lifting. I fell asleep with the acceptance letter under my pillow, dreaming not of revenge, but of justice. Medical school was not an education. It was an extraction process. It was designed to separate the person you used to be from the doctor you were becoming, and the machine that did the separating was fueled by caffeine, cortisol, and a terrifying lack of sleep. At Stonebridge University School of Medicine, time stopped acting like a linear concept. Days bled into nights. Tuesday morning rounds merged seamlessly into Thursday afternoon lectures without anyone seeming to notice the sun had risen and set twice in between. I lived in the library and the hospital wards. My apartment was nothing more than a storage unit for my clothes and a place to crash for 4 hours at a time. I moved through the semesters with a desperate, frantic energy, driven by a fear that had nothing to do with failing a test. Most of my classmates were afraid of getting a B. They were afraid of not getting their top choice residency. I was afraid of the repo man. Even though I had the fellowship, even though Elena had secured the house, the old panic lived in my bone marrow. I felt like an imposter who had snuck into the castle. And at any moment, security was going to realize I was just the girl who had been discarded in a yellow room. I studied until my vision blurred because I believed that if I stopped moving, the poverty and the abandonment would catch up to me. I was running a marathon at a sprinter's pace, constantly looking over my shoulder. The only thing that kept me tethered to the earth was a phone call that happened every single night at 10 o'clock. It didn't matter if I was deep in a pathology textbook or halfway through a double shift. When my phone vibrated, I stepped into the hallway. "Hey, Mom," I would answer, my voice usually raspy from dehydration. "Victoria." Elena's voice would crackle through the speaker, warm and steady. "Did you eat today?" She never asked about my grades. She never asked if I had impressed the attending physician. She never asked if I was going to be valedictorian. She asked the only question that mattered to a mother whose child had once been frail. "I had a bagel," I would lie, or tell the truth. "And half a sandwich." "Protein," she would command gently. "You need protein for the brain. I put $20 in your Venmo. Buy a real dinner, not from a vending machine." "I have money, Mom." "Buy the dinner." "Victoria, tell me you ate it." "I will eat it." "Good. Love you. Go save lives." That 30-second conversation was the anchor that stopped me from drifting away. It was a reminder that I wasn't just a brain in a jar. I was a person who needed to be fed when it came time to choose my clinical rotations. I didn't hesitate. My classmates fought for dermatology because the hours were good, or plastic surgery because the money was better. I put my name down for pediatric oncology. Walking onto the ward for the first time as a medical student was a visceral, physical shock. The smell hit me first. It is a specific cocktail of industrial floor cleaner, latex, cafeteria jello, and fear. It smells like waiting. I stood at the nurse's station, adjusting my short white coat, and my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked at the rooms. Room 302, room 304. They were identical to the room where I had sat 13 years ago. The murmurs of the machines were the same. But then I looked down at the stethoscope around my neck. I touched the plastic ID badge clipped to my pocket. Victoria Griffin, medical student. I wasn't the girl in the bed anymore. I was the one standing guard. I threw myself into the rotation. I memorized every chart. I knew the white blood cell counts of my patients before the residents did. I knew which anti-nausea meds worked best for the 7-year-old in room 410, and which cartoon the teenager in room 412 used to block out the world. But I also noticed something else. I noticed the parents. I watched them in the hallways, counting out crumpled dollar bills to see if they had enough for a cafeteria sandwich. I watched them sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, wearing the same clothes for 3 days because they didn't want to leave their child's side to go home and do laundry. I watched the quiet, crushing weight of the incidental costs of cancer, the parking fees, the gas, the overpriced hospital food. I remembered Elena working double shifts. I remembered the $6 strawberries. I knew I couldn't fix the healthcare system. I couldn't wave a wand and make the treatment free, but I could do something. I had my fellowship stipend. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more money than I needed for rent and books. I was used to living on nothing, so the surplus sat in my bank account, feeling heavy. One afternoon, I went to the hospital gift shop. I bought 50 gift cards for the hospital cafeteria, loaded with $20 each. Then I bought 50 prepaid parking vouchers from the garage office. I sat in my tiny apartment that night with a stack of plain white envelopes. I put a food card and a parking voucher in each one. On the front of the envelope, I wrote a single word: Miso. The next day, I started my covert operation. When I saw a mother weeping quietly by the elevator while checking her bank balance on her phone, I waited until she went to the bathroom, then slipped an envelope into her purse. When I saw a father sleeping in the waiting room, I tucked an envelope under his coat. I left them at the nurse's station with a note saying, "For anyone who needs a break today, anonymous." I didn't tell Elena. This wasn't about getting credit. It wasn't about being praised. It was a private conversation between me and the universe. I called it the Miso Fund. It was my way of honoring the woman who had saved me by helping the people who were trying to save their own children. Every time I placed an envelope, I felt the ghost of the terrified 13-year-old girl inside me settle down a little more. While I was fighting the ghost of poverty with gift cards, I was fighting the ghost of abandonment with data. I needed a research project for my final year. Most students picked something clinical, a drug trial or a surgical technique. I chose the mind. I designed a study titled Psychosocial Interventions and Long-Term Resilience in Abandoned Pediatric Patients with Chronic Illness. It was autobiographical, though no one knew that except me. I aggregated data on children who had gone through the system without strong parental advocacy. I interviewed social workers. I tracked outcomes. The data was stark. It showed that medical survival was only half the battle. Without a consistent anchor figure, the survival rates dropped, and the mental health outcomes plummeted. I poured my soul into that paper. When it was published in a respectable pediatric journal, it made a ripple, then the ripple became a wave. I was invited to present a poster at a regional conference. My name started appearing on the department bulletin board. Victoria Griffin, emerging voice in pediatric psychosocial care. And that was when the vultures started circling. I was in the student lounge, eating a protein bar and studying for my board exams. When my phone buzzed, it was a message from an old friend from high school, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey Vic," the text read, "I didn't know you were still in touch with your birth parents. This is sweet." Attached was a screenshot from Facebook. I clicked on it. The profile belonged to Gwen Mallory. The profile picture was a heavily filtered photo of her and Derek on a golf course, looking rich and carefree, but the post below it made my stomach turn. Gwen had shared a link to the university website, specifically the article about my research publication. The caption read, "So incredibly proud of our daughter, Victoria. She is going to be an amazing doctor. Always knew she was destined for greatness. It takes a village, but blood always tells. Proud mom. Doctor in the family." I stared at the screen, the protein bar turned to ash in my mouth. Our daughter, blood always tells. The audacity was so physical it felt like a slap. They were claiming me. After 13 years of silence, after treating me like a bad debt, after signing the papers that legally erased our relationship, they were using my success to garnish their social reputation. They were harvesting the crops they had refused to water. I scrolled down to the comments. "Congratulations, Gwen. You must be thrilled. She looks just like you. Derek, great parenting pays off." I wanted to throw the phone through the window. I wanted to log on and reply to every single comment with a PDF of the surrender documents. I wanted to scream, but I remembered the vow I made. I will be a mirror. I took a deep breath. I saved the screenshot. I put it in a folder on my laptop labeled Evidence. Then I made a phone call. Not to Gwen, but to the one person who knew where the skeletons were buried. Marla Winton speaking. "Marla, it is Victoria Griffin." "Victoria." Her voice brightened immediately. Marla had moved up the ranks. She was now a regional director for social services, a woman with real power. "I saw the article about your paper. It is brilliant. You are making us all look good." "Thanks. Marla, listen, I need a favor, a professional one." "Name it." "The file," I said. "My original case file. The one from Redwood Children's Hospital, the emergency custody order, the notes from Dr. Hayes, the financial audit regarding the insurance fraud attempt." The line went quiet for a second. Marla's voice dropped to a serious, "Protective register." "I have it archived. Why?" "They are posting about me," I said. keeping my voice steady. They are playing the proud parents on social media. I have a feeling that when I graduate, they might try to rewrite history. They might try to say they never really left, or that it was a misunderstanding. Gaslighting, Marla said. The word sharp as a knife. Exactly. I don't want to sue them. I don't want money. But I want the truth locked in a vault where they can't touch it. I want to make sure that if they ever try to paint themselves as victims or saints, I have the receipt with the original timestamps. Consider it done, Marla said firmly. I will pull the physical file from the archives myself. I will have it digitized and encrypted. Nobody rewrites my cases. Victoria. Especially not that one. Thank you, Marla. You just focus on graduating, she said. I will handle the perimeter. I hung up, feeling a cold, calm satisfaction. Let them post. Let them preen. I had the truth in a box. And I held the key. The final rotation of my 4th year was ending. I was exhausted, burnt out, and running on fumes. I was doing rounds with Dr. Dean Miller, the dean of the medical school, who still took clinical shifts because he hated sitting in meetings. We were seeing a patient in room 310, a 6-year-old boy named Toby who needed a lumbar puncture. He was terrified. He was screaming, kicking, and thrashing. The residents were trying to hold him down. The nurse was looking for sedation. Dean Miller looked stressed. We need to calm him down before we proceed, or it is unsafe. I stepped forward. Sir, may I? The dean nodded. Go ahead, Griffin. I didn't try to hold Toby down. I didn't tell him to be brave. I sat on the floor next to the bed, so I was below his eye level. I took off my stethoscope and put it on the floor. Hey, Toby, I whispered. He stopped screaming to look at me, sniffing. This room is scary, right? I said. It smells weird, and the lights are too bright. He nodded. I used to live in a room just like this, I said. The residents went quiet. The dean went quiet. You did? Toby whispered. Yeah, when I was a little older than you. And I hated the needles. I hated them so much. Did you cry? He asked. Oh, yeah, big time. I cried so much I got snot on my shirt. Toby giggled weakly. But you know what I learned? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small foil sticker of a superhero. I learned that if you squeeze your eyes shut and count to 10 really slowly, by the time you get to 10, the bad part is usually over. I held out my hand. Do you want to count with me? I will hold your hand. I won't let go until you say 10. Toby looked at me. He saw the scar on my chest that was visible just above my scrub top. He saw someone who wasn't lying to him. He reached out his small hand. Okay. The procedure took 4 minutes. Toby cried a little, but he didn't thrash. I held his hand the entire time, counting slowly, anchoring him to the room. When we walked out into the hallway, Dean Miller stopped me. He was a tall man, intimidating, but he was looking at me with a strange expression. Griffin, he said. Yes, sir? Did I overstep? No, he said. You know, we can teach you anatomy, we can teach you pharmacology, we can teach you how to stitch a wound. He gestured back toward the room. We cannot teach that. That is not something you learn in a textbook. That is something you earn. He made a note on his clipboard and walked away without another word. 2 weeks later, the letter appeared in my mailbox. It was heavy stock paper with the university seal embossed in gold. Dear Victoria Griffin, it is the unanimous decision of the faculty committee to award you the Dean's Medal for Clinical Excellence. This award is given to the graduating student who best exemplifies the ideals of compassion, skill, and integrity in patient care. Traditionally, the recipient of the Dean's Medal delivers the student address at the graduation ceremony. We would be honored if you would accept this invitation. I sat on the floor of my apartment, holding the letter, the graduation ceremony, the biggest stage of my life, the moment I had been working toward for 4 years, and then the realization hit me. Every student was allowed to invite guests. The VIP section was reserved for the families of the award winners. I thought about the screenshot of Gwen's Facebook post. I thought about Derek's email. I thought about their desperate need to be seen as the architects of my success. A plan formed in my mind. It was cold, precise, and absolutely devastating. I picked up my phone and called Elena. "Mom," I said, "you are going to need a new dress." "Why?" she asked. "For graduation?" "For the front row," I said. "I am giving the speech." "Oh, Victoria!" she gasped. "And Mom," I added, my voice hardening. "I am going to invite them." "Who?" "The Mallorys. I am going to send them VIP tickets, front row, right next to you." "Victoria," Elena warned, her voice dropping. "Why? Why let them in?" "Because," I said, looking at the letter in my hand, "they want to be part of the show. I think it is time I gave them exactly what they asked for." The email from the registrar's office landed in my inbox at 8 in the morning. It was flagged with a high-priority red exclamation mark, the digital equivalent of a siren. Subject: Dean's Medal Recipient/VIP. Seating allocations. I sat in the student lounge, nursing a lukewarm coffee, and opened the message. It was standard administrative procedure. As the valedictorian speaker and the recipient of the Dean's Medal, I was entitled to a private box or a dedicated row in the VIP section for my family. The email asked me to submit the names of my guests by noon on Friday, so security passes could be printed. I did not hesitate. I pulled up the spreadsheet attached to the email and began to type. Guest 1, Elena Griffin. Mother, I typed that word. Mother, with a fierce sense of possession. It was not a biological descriptor. It was a title she had earned in the trenches of chemotherapy wards and late-night fever spikes. Guest 2, Marla Winton. Friend/family. Marla had been the one to navigate the legal labyrinth that freed me. She was the one who had filed the paperwork to ensure my credit score wasn't ruined by my biological father's debts before I even turned 18. She deserved to see the result of her casework. Guest 3, Dr. Nolan Hayes, mentor. He was the first man who didn't look at me as a billable item. He was the doctor who had screamed at my biological parents in a yellow room, risking his own professional standing to protect a child he barely knew. I looked at the list. 3 names, 3 people who constituted the entire infrastructure of my survival. It was a short list, but it was a strong one. I hit save and prepared to close the laptop. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a call from the university administration office. The caller ID displayed Mrs. Gable, event coordinator. Mrs. Gable was a sweet, fluttery woman who had been helping me coordinate the logistics of the ceremony. I assumed she was calling to ask about the pronunciation of my middle name, or the dietary restrictions for the reception. "Hello, Mrs. Gable," I answered, putting on my polite student voice. "Victoria, dear, Mrs." Gable's voice sounded strained, tight with the specific anxiety of a bureaucrat facing an irregularity. "I am so glad I caught you. We have a bit of a situation regarding the guest list." "Is there a problem with the names I just submitted?" I asked, frowning. No, those are fine," she stammered. "But we received a phone call about 20 minutes ago from a Mr. Derek Mallory and a Mrs. Gwen Mallory." The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. The air in the student lounge went dead still. "What did they want?" I asked. My voice was low. "Well, they identified themselves as your parents," Mrs. Gable said, clearly confused. "They were quite insistent. Mr. Mallory mentioned that they had been trying to coordinate with you but assumed you were too busy with finals to handle the logistics. He requested 2 seats in the VIP section. He was very specific. Victoria," he said, and I'm quoting here, "we want to be front and center when our girl takes the stage." I closed my eyes. The audacity was breathtaking. It was not enough that they had emailed me. It was not enough that they had posted on Facebook. Now, they were calling the administration, bypassing me entirely, and demanding premium real estate in the moment of my greatest achievement. They were trying to manage my graduation the same way they had tried to manage my cancer diagnosis, by controlling the narrative and securing the best outcome for themselves. "Mrs. Gable," I said, gripping the phone so hard my plastic case creaked. "Did you give them the tickets?" "I told them I needed to confirm with you first," she said. "But Mr. Mallory was quite persuasive. He mentioned he was a senior partner at a law firm and hinted that it would be a shame if there was a mix-up that caused embarrassment for the university. He offered to make a donation to the alumni fund to smooth things over." Of course he did. Derek Mallory thought every door in the world had a coin slot. He thought he could buy his way back into the life he had sold 13 years ago. "Victoria?" Mrs. Gable asked gently. "Should I add them to the list? I know families can be complicated, but usually, for the Dean's Medal, we try to accommodate everyone." I stood there, frozen. 5 minutes passed in my head in the span of 5 seconds. My first instinct was to scream, "No!" My first instinct was to tell Mrs. Gable to ban them from the campus, to put their photos at the security checkpoint with a do not admit order. I wanted to protect my peace. I wanted to deny them the satisfaction. But then, I thought about the email Derek had sent. The economy has been tough. I thought about Gwen's Facebook post, "Blood always tells." They were not coming to celebrate me. They were coming to harvest me. They saw a doctor with a high earning potential and a prestigious award, and they wanted to attach their names to mine before the rest of the world realized they had severed ties. They were betting on my silence. They were banking on the fact that I would be too polite, too ashamed, or too professional to make a scene. I needed to make a call. "Mrs. Gable, give me 10 minutes, I said. "I will call you back." I hung up and dialed the only number that mattered. Elena answered on the first ring. She was probably on her lunch break at the clinic. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" "They called the school," I said. I didn't have to specify who they were. "Derek and Gwen. They demanded VIP tickets. They tried to bribe the coordinator." The line went silent. I could hear the background noise of the clinic. A phone ringing. A door closing. But Elena was quiet. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "I want to tell them to go to hell," I said. "I want to lock the doors." "You can do that," Elena said calmly. "It is your day. You earned it. If you want them gone, say the word, and I will stand at the door myself and block them." "But?" I asked. I knew there was a but. "But," Elena continued, her voice turning thoughtful, "if you ban them, they become victims. They will go back to their country club and tell everyone that their ungrateful daughter has been brainwashed. That they tried to reach out but you pushed them away. They will spin the story. Victoria, they are good at that." She paused. "However, if you let them in, if you let them sit exactly where they want to sit, then what?" "Then they have to watch," Elena said. "They have to sit there and watch you become something they said you couldn't be. They have to see the reality of what they threw away. Sometimes, the best punishment isn't exile, it is exposure." I leaned against the vending machine, the hum of the compressor vibrating against my back. Elena was right. If I hid, I was still the scared 13-year-old girl in the hospital room. If I locked them out, I was acting out of fear. But if I invited them, if I placed them right in the spotlight? "You are right," I said. A cold clarity washed over me. "I don't want them in the back row. I don't want them hiding." "What are you going to do?" Elena asked. "I am going to give them the best seats in the house," I said. "I am going to make sure they can't look away." I hung up and called Mrs. Gable back. "Victoria?" she asked anxiously. "Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice smooth and professional. "I have thought about it. You are right. Family is important. Please issue 2 VIP tickets for Mr. and Mrs. Mallory." "Oh, wonderful," she sighed with relief. "I will put them in the 3rd row, just behind." "No," I interrupted. "Not the 3rd row. I want them in the front row. Seat A1 and seat A2, right next to my mother, Elena Griffin." "The front row?" Mrs. Gable hesitated. Those are usually reserved for the highest honorees and the board of trustees. And well, putting them right next to Mrs. Griffin, will that be comfortable? It will be perfect, I said. And Mrs. Gable? You know how the ceremony is being live-streamed this year? Yes, we have 3 camera crews. Make sure the camera angle for the front row is clear, I said. I want to make sure my parents' reaction is captured when I give my speech. They have waited a long time for this. Of course, she said, sounding delighted by my apparent sentimentality. We will make sure they are in the frame. Thank you, I said. I really appreciate it. I hung up the phone. The trap was set. Now, I had to write the speech. I went back to my apartment. I sat at my desk and opened a blank document. I had written a draft a week ago. A standard, inspiring speech about resilience, hard work, and the future of medicine. It was safe. It was boring. I selected all the text and hit delete. I was not going to give a speech. I was going to deliver a case study. I closed my eyes and pictured the auditorium. I pictured Derek in his expensive suit, checking his watch. I pictured Gwen with her frozen smile, looking for the camera. They were coming to a performance. Expecting a daughter who would play the part of the successful redemption story, I began to type. I didn't use flowery adjectives. I didn't use metaphors about climbing mountains or sailing seas. I wrote like a doctor. Patient history, chief complaint, timeline of trauma, diagnosis. I wrote about a 13-year-old female presenting with acute leukemia. I wrote about the financial toxicity of the diagnosis. I wrote about the social determinants of health, specifically, the impact of parental abandonment on adolescent prognosis. I stripped the emotion out of the sentences until they were sharp little blades of fact. I didn't say, "It hurt when they left." I wrote, "On October 14th, custody was transferred to the state due to refusal of financial liability. It was cold, it was clinical, and it was undeniable. I worked on it for 6 hours. When I was done, I printed it out. It was 3 pages long, 3 pages to summarize 13 years of silence. But words weren't enough. I needed evidence." The next morning, I walked into the audio-visual department of the university. The technician, a guy named Dave with a ponytail and a Metallica t-shirt, was organizing slides for the ceremony. "Hey," I said. "I am Victoria Griffin, the student speaker." "Oh, hey," Dave said, swiveling in his chair. "I have your PowerPoint loaded. Just the title slide and the university logo, right?" "Actually," I said, pulling a flash drive out of my pocket, "I need to add one slide, a visual aid. It needs to go up at the very end. When I say the words, 'the ones who stayed.'" "Sure," Dave said, taking the drive. "What is it?" He plugged it in and opened the file. The image filled his monitor. It was a scanned Polaroid photo. It was grainy and slightly overexposed, taken by a night nurse in the pediatric ward 13 years ago. In the photo, a bald, skeletal girl was sitting in a hospital bed, hooked up to 3 different IV lines. She looked ghostly, her eyes sunken and terrified. Sitting next to her, squeezed onto the narrow mattress, was a woman in navy scrubs. The woman was asleep, her head resting on the girl's shoulder, her hand protectively covering the girl's hand where the IV needle entered. It was me and Elena. It was taken on Christmas Eve, the night Gwen and Derek had been in Aspen, skiing with Paige. Dave looked at the photo, then up at me. He didn't ask questions. He saw the contrast between the healthy, vibrant young woman standing in front of him and the dying girl on the screen. "That is heavy," Dave said quietly. "Can you do it?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "I will cue it up. It will be on the main projection screen, 40 feet wide. Nobody is going to miss it." "Good," I said. "Thank you, Dave." The night before graduation, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my apartment, the speech memorized in my head. I felt a strange vibration in my hands, but it wasn't the tremor of fear I used to have. It was the vibration of a bowstring pulled tight, ready to release the arrow. My phone buzzed again. It was another email from Derek. "Victoria, We are so excited for tomorrow. We got the tickets. Front row. We are bringing a photographer friend of ours to get some candid shots of us together after the ceremony. Maybe we can do a dinner at the Chop House downtown? My treat. My treat. The phrase echoed in my empty kitchen. He was offering to buy me a steak dinner after refusing to buy me life-saving chemotherapy. He was offering to pay for a meal now that I didn't need him to. He thought this was a reconciliation. He thought that by showing up, by smiling, by sitting in the VIP section, he could overwrite the past. He thought that because I had sent the tickets, I had accepted his terms. He was wrong. I walked over to the window and looked out at the campus lights. They were coming for a return on their investment. They were coming to claim the credit. They were coming to show the world that they were good parents who had raised a successful doctor. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to give them exactly what they feared most. I was going to give them the truth. 40 feet high and amplified by a sound system. "See you tomorrow, Dad," I whispered to the glass. "Don't be late." The ceremony began with the pomp and circumstance typical of a medical school graduation. But to me, it felt like the slow march of a jury returning to a courtroom. The air in the auditorium was thick with body heat and the scent of expensive perfume. I sat on the stage, my hands folded in my lap, looking down at the sea of faces. I found them immediately. It was impossible to miss them. I had placed them in the center of the front row, directly under the harsh wash of the stage lights. Gwen was wearing a cream-colored dress that I knew cost more than my first year of tuition. She was fanning herself with the program, smiling that tight. Practice smile she used for country club luncheons. Beside her, Derek sat with his legs crossed, looking around the room with an air of appraisal. He was checking the architecture. He was checking the quality of the suits worn by the other fathers. He was looking for opportunities. They looked like royalty, but I knew they were just scavengers in silk. Next to them, separated by a distinct, empty inch of space, sat Elena. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress and the pearls I had bought her for her birthday. She looked terrified. Her hands were clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. She kept glancing at Gwen and Derek, not with anger, but with a kind of confusion, as if she could not understand how two people could look so polished on the outside while being so hollow on the inside. Dean Miller approached the podium. The hum of the crowd died down. "We now come to the presentation of the Dean's Medal for Clinical Excellence," he announced. His voice boomed through the speakers. "This year, the faculty was unanimous. The recipient is a student who has demonstrated not only superior academic achievement, but a profound commitment to the human side of medicine." He paused. Gwen straightened up. She elbowed Derek. They were ready for their moment. They were ready to stand up and wave. "Victoria Griffin," the dean said. I saw the flinch. It was small, but from my vantage point, it was seismic. Gwen's smile faltered. Her head jerked slightly, as if she had been slapped. The name Griffin echoed in the silence. It was a name that did not belong to her. It was a name that erased her. She looked at the program in her hand, staring at the bold print, trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she owned with the stranger being announced. I stood up. The applause started. Polite and rhythmic. I walked to the podium. The dean placed the heavy medal around my neck. It felt cool and solid, an anchor in the storm. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the 2,000 people in the room. Then, I looked down, right at seat A1, right at Derek. He was clapping. But his eyes were cold. He was calculating the damage. He was wondering if he could spin this, if he could explain away the name change as a stage name or a clerical error. I took a breath. "Most graduation speeches are about the future," I began. My voice was steady, magnified by the speakers so that it filled every corner of the hall. "They are about dreams. They are about the horizon." I paused. "I want to talk about the past. Specifically, I want to talk about a Tuesday afternoon in October, 13 years ago." The room went quiet. It was not the respectful silence of a ceremony. It was the confused silence of a crowd sensing a collision. I was 13 years old, I continued, speaking with the clinical detachment of a surgeon dictating a case file. I was sitting in an examination room at Redwood Children's Hospital. I had just been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The prognosis was good. The survival rate was 90%. All I needed was treatment. I looked directly at Gwen. She had stopped fanning herself. She was frozen, her eyes wide, staring up at me like a deer in headlights. "But treatment is expensive," I said. And my parents were practical people. They looked at the cost of the chemotherapy. They looked at the cost of the hospital stay. And then, they looked at their assets. They looked at their other healthy child. They looked at their social standing. I saw a ripple go through the faculty row behind me. Dean Miller turned his head sharply. "They did the math," I said, "and they decided that the return on investment for a sick child was not high enough. So, they made a choice. They did not choose the chemotherapy. They chose to protect their credit score." A gasp ran through the audience. It started in the back and rolled forward like a wave. "They signed a document surrendering custody to the state," I said. "They walked out of the room to save money on their insurance premiums. They left a 13-year-old girl alone in a room with a cancer diagnosis and a social worker." Derek looked like he was about to vomit. His face had turned a sickly, ash-gray color. He made a move to stand up, perhaps to storm out, perhaps to shout, but he realized he couldn't. He was in the front row. The cameras were rolling. The live stream was broadcasting to the world. He was trapped in the glare of the truth. "I spent that first night waiting for them to come back," I said. "I thought it was a mistake. I thought surely no parent chooses a bank account over a heartbeat." I gripped the sides of the podium. "But they didn't come back. They never came back." I let the silence hang there for 5 seconds. It was heavy enough to crush bone. "But someone else did." I turned slightly and signaled to the technician in the booth, behind me. The massive projection screen flickered to life. The photo appeared. It was 40 feet tall. The grainy black and white image of the skeletal girl in the hospital bed and the exhausted nurse sleeping in the chair next to her, holding her hand. "This is Elena," I said, my voice softening for the first time. I pointed to the woman in the navy dress in the front row. She was the night nurse. She didn't know me. She owed me nothing. But she saw a child who had been discarded, and she decided that her job didn't end when she clocked out. She sat with me. She held the bucket when I was sick. She worked double shifts to pay for the medication the state wouldn't cover. She painted my room lavender because she remembered I liked it. Elena had her hands over her mouth. She was crying, shaking her head as if to say no. "Don't look at me." "We have a word for people who give birth," I said, looking back at the audience. "We call them parents. It is a biological term. It is easy to earn. You just have to show up once." I looked down at Gwen and Derek. "But there is another word," I said. "Mom, that is a title. You don't get that by blood. You get that by staying when the bill comes." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a check. It was for $10,000, every cent I had saved from my fellowship stipend. "Today," I announced, "I am establishing the Elena Griffin Promise. It is a scholarship fund for pediatric patients who have entered the foster care system. It is a promise that no child in this hospital will ever have to wonder if they are worth the cost of their survival." I turned to the dean. "Dean Miller, I would like to invite the woman who taught me everything I know about medicine up to the stage." Dean Miller, looking stunned but deeply moved, stepped forward. He began to clap. The faculty began to clap. And then, the audience stood up. It was a roar. 2,000 people rose to their feet. They weren't cheering for me. They were cheering for the nurse in the navy dress. Elena stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She looked at me, and I nodded. She walked up the stairs to the stage, and Dean Miller shook her hand, handing her a bouquet of roses that had been intended for me. She hugged me, burying her face in my shoulder. "You foolish girl," she whispered, weeping. "You spent all your money." "Best investment I ever made," I whispered back. The applause lasted for 2 minutes. When it finally died down, I returned to the microphone for one last sentence. I looked down at the empty seats where Gwen and Derek had been sitting, but they weren't empty, they were still there. They had been unable to leave during the ovation. They sat there, small and diminished, surrounded by a standing crowd that was cheering for the woman who had replaced them. "To my biological parents," I said. Gwen looked up. Her mascara was running. She looked old. She looked broken. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for teaching me that a title is empty if there is no action behind it. Because of you, I learned how to cherish the person who actually earned the name Mom." I stepped back. The ceremony continued, but the air had changed. The pretense was gone. The truth had been laid bare on the operating table. When the ceremony ended, the chaos was immediate. The graduates threw their caps. Families rushed the stage. I tried to make my way toward Elena, who was being swarmed by faculty members wanting to shake her hand. Then, I felt a hand on my arm. I turned. It was Derek. Gwen was right behind him. They had pushed their way through the crowd. Their faces flushed, their eyes wide with a mixture of shame and desperation. "Victoria," Derek said. His voice was breathless. He forced a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "That was quite a speech. Dramatic. You always had a flair for the dramatic." "We need to talk," Gwen said, reaching out as if to touch my face. "There are things you don't understand. The situation back then, it was complicated. We were protecting the family." "We can fix this," Derek said, pulling a business card out of his pocket. "We can sit down, have dinner. I know you are angry, but we are your parents. We can help you set up your practice. I have connections." They were still doing it. They were still trying to negotiate. They thought that because I had acknowledged them, the door was open. They thought that public shaming was just a bargaining tactic. I looked at Derek's hand. I looked at the business card. "No," I said. "Victoria, be reasonable." Gwen pleaded. "We are your family." I stepped closer to them. I lowered my voice so only they could hear me. "You are not my family," I said. "You are my history, and I am done studying history." "But," Derek started. "I have said everything I have to say." I cut him off. "I said it into a microphone. I said it to the world. There is nothing left for you here." I turned my back on them. It was the hardest and easiest thing I had ever done. I walked away, leaving them standing in the crushed confetti of a celebration they had not paid for. I found Elena near the exit. She grabbed my hand. We walked out of the auditorium, into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. We didn't look back. The next morning, the final twist arrived. It didn't come from me. It came from the state of North Carolina. Marla Winton had kept her promise. When I had asked her to pull the file, she hadn't just archived it, she had reactivated the financial review. In the mailbox of the Mallory residence in Highland Park, a certified letter arrived. It was from the Department of Revenue, co-signed by the Department of Social Services. It was a demand for restitution, under state law. Parents who voluntarily surrender custody of a child for non-medical reasons while retaining significant assets are liable for the cost of the state's care. Marla had run the numbers. She had calculated 13 years of foster care stipends. She had calculated the portion of the medical bills that Medicaid had covered, which the state was now reclaiming because the abandonment was deemed financial negligence. The bill was for $280,000. It wasn't revenge, it was accounting. They had tried to treat me like a business transaction, so the state had sent them the final invoice. I heard about it later from Marla. She told me Derek tried to fight it, but the paperwork he had signed 13 years ago, the paperwork he thought absolved him, was actually his confession. He had signed away his rights, but he hadn't signed away his debt. But I didn't care about the money. I was sitting on the front porch of the house in Brookhaven. The sun was setting, casting a long golden light over the lawn. Miso the cat was asleep on my lap. Elena was inside, making tea. I looked at the dean's medal sitting on the table. I looked at the lavender paint on the window trim. Family isn't blood. Family isn't a name on a birth certificate. Family is simply the people who are standing next to you when the bill comes due. And I was finally paid in full. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Victoria's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Kate Revenge Stories. Hit the like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people.